you got a person sitting in front of you and they're taking 8, 9 different medications and doesn't seem to be working, and you've done your assessment, your psychometrics and everything, and you are pretty sure that this is trauma and these drugs are gonna, if anything, they're gonna make it worse, not better. How do you break the news? What I've actually found is that by the time these people get to me, they already know something's wrong. They already know that the drugs are not working. The doctors they've been seeing don't understand. And yes, I will go through the psychometric evaluations that I do and all that, but very often I'm telling them something that they already know.
Welcome back to our show, Empower Your Life. I'm your host, Cindy Marie. Our next guest, he graduated as a physician in 1990s, set for a medical career, and his life took a turn until, after spectacular descent, he became a homeless, junkie, on heroin and crack. But now he's sober and clean for all these drugs for over 10 years. And he has retrained himself as a psychologist and specialist in treating trauma and stressor-related disorders. He also published or released his new book, A Beginner's Guide to Trauma, which you're going to know now what this conversation is all about, which is the T, trauma. So without further ado, may I welcome to you our next guest all the way in Bali, Indonesia, Dr. Reshie Joseph. Dr. Reshie, thank you so much for being part of this show.
Oh, terima kasih banyak, I would say.
Sama-sama.
Thank you. Oh, you can speak bahasa Indonesia? Sedikit?
Sedikit. I was about to say in Spanish. My God, mixing. Okay, yes. My family lives in Indonesia.
Okay. Well, maybe we should do the podcast in Indonesia. Never know.
My God. Maybe in the future I'll have to refresh my bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah.
But anyway, Dr. Reshie, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy, for what was a very terse and I would say very generous introduction. I did start. I had a very privileged start to life. People often think of junkies as coming from bad neighborhoods, where there's crime and fire going on all day, and crack dealers in the corner, and mothers who are crack addicts and alcoholic fathers who are that's the stereotype. You don't think of a junkie as coming from an upper middle class family where dad's a world-class surgeon and mom's fantastically successful investor. It doesn't square. And I went through school, and here's the interesting thing, because when I look back now, now I can see that many of the signs that things were going really badly wrong with me were starting to show. At the time, nobody noticed it, and I didn't say anything about it, because if you're the kind of kid who gets really good grades, then nobody asks. You're by definition the right kid. You know what I mean? I mean, in particularly in Asian cultures. In Asian cultures where they value the grade. If you come home with 10 A's, you don't have problems. By definition, right?
I agree.
Yeah. So got into, it's very difficult to get into medical school. You have to do very well in school, and you have to, do various things. But going to medical school is, I would say, when I look at all my friends and colleagues who studied alongside me, architecture, law, but I would still say medicine, probably one of the hardest subjects to study, especially in the time they give you, which is 6 years. There I was ready, and I was going to be a neurosurgeon because I'm very interested in neuroscience. I've always been interested in the brain, fascinated by the brain, how it works, why it does this and not that, since I was a boy. So it was either going to be a neurologist or a neuroscientist or a neurosurgeon, and Dad's a surgeon. So when I spoke to him and I said, Dad, I'm thinking of going into doing a PhD in neuroscience, he goes, yeah, neurosurgery. So that was the plan anyway. But in the book, let me try and not use a complicated word. The word I was going to use was Adam break, but I met and I elaborated on a relationship that I had with a young boy that was a very critical one in my life, because it was the first secure attachment that I had formed to another human being. Yeah. Now, the thing about attachment, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go on.
The thing about attachment is that people, number one, it's not love, right? People mistake love and attachment for the same thing. They're not. Love is, emotional, oxytocin, there's lots and lots going on there. You can fall in love, you can fall out of it. Attachment is purely a survival strategy. Until birds came onto the planet, we don't see attachment. They lay their eggs, they swim away. Frogs lay their eggs, they swim away. There are no attachments between the daddy frog and the baby frog. There's no attachment. But with birds, when the chicks hatch and they cry, the mother feeds them. And then they go, and they don't leave the nest. They stay with the nest until the birds fledge and are strong enough to fly away. That is the very first time we see attachment in nature. And as we go through the evolutionary chain, we see attachment behaviors become more and more and more sophisticated. Till the point we get to humans, where we have the most sophisticated, and where attachment is the most important survival mechanism for us, because we are totally helpless at birth. Simple reason. A newborn antelope can run on the first day of its life. It can run. A newborn human baby not even lift its own head on the first day of its birth. It is completely helpless. So nature has had to give us a mechanism that was powerful enough, that would ensure that, like the mommy bird and the baby bird, that mommy bird was going to feed us and look after us, right?
Yeah.
Of course, we're not birds. We're much more complicated. We're humans.
Yeah. So let me, Dr. Reshie, if I might cut you, before we proceed with this attachment or the human behaviors, I'm pretty sure that there are a lot of people would very, very keen to understand your story, like, because you mentioned a little bit about your transition from having a middle class life to becoming homeless and then transition to where you are right now. Would you help us to sort of bring back that story? How did you even end up being homeless and then, really get up and showing up right now as who you are being? So we have that fantastic transition, if you don't mind.
Yeah. Thing is, I've told this story so many times, and you can find it on YouTube as well. But I'm happy to do it again if you'd like me to.
Yes, please. Every way of expressing your story, I believe, is always unique.
Okay. Well, I grew up in a home that was filled with books and music and the arts, the sciences. I had the opportunity to explore any aspect of anything that I wanted to explore. What I didn't notice at the time was that I had a real difficulty forming secure attachments to other people. Now, what do I mean by secure attachments? B.F. Skinner, a very famous behavioral psychologist, for experiments where he put 4 different mice in 4 different boxes. And there's a lever. When you press the lever, food comes out. Secure attachment is when you press the lever, food always comes out. You press it, it always comes out. You press it, it always comes out. If you look at that in the context of a relationship, right? If let's say I press the Cindy Marie lever, the Cindy Marie food will always come out, whatever that food happens to be. If I turn to you, in other words, our attachment is secure. I know you're not going to run away from me. I know you're not going to abandon me. I know you're not going to turn around and attack me, or any number of things. If I turn to you for nurturing, which is what food really is, I turn to you for nurturing. If I'm in distress, I know I will get it, and I'm secure in that. But there were other situations where that was not the case. The second mouse had a lever that was deliberately made so that if you pressed it, it might give you food, but it might not. So sometimes you press it, 3 times, it gives you food 3 times. Sometimes you press it 11 times, but it doesn't give you anything. So that mouse just kept pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing and pressing the lever, right? Because it was obsessed with the lever, and it started to build up a huge mountain of food, but it would not stop pressing the lever because that was an insecure attachment. And it's what we call insecure. The type of insecure attachment is ambivalent anxious, right? You can see the anxiety. The lever is not going to give me food. I'm in real distress. If I talk to Cindy Marie today, is she going to nurture me, or is she going to punch me? I don't know. So, or every time I'm in distress, every time I'm hurting, every time I need your help, are you going to help me? I need to make sure. So I'll keep pressing it every day, right? And you didn't send me a WhatsApp today. Oh my God, the lever's not working. Or why do you go away with your girlfriends? What about me? Ambivalent anxious. And then the opposite, you have the ambivalent avoidant. The third mouse, the lever doesn't work at all. It doesn't work at all. Okay? This is me. It does not work at all. You can press it as many times as you like. Nothing comes out of the wall. And what was interesting in the research was that the third mouse actually crawled out of his box. went
Yeah.
into the second mouse's box and started to eat the food in there. This is just something I happen to know from reading the side notes in B.F. Skinner's hand. That it's not actually in the official paper, but it's like these bloody rats, they do all kinds of funny things. And the fourth one, which is a very, very special category, is called disorganized attachment. Um, that mouse had a lever that produced food, but every time it pressed the lever and food came out, there was an electrical grid under the floor. So every time it got food, it got an electric shock at the same time. So the brain began to associate nurturing with pain. And you can imagine how extremely confusing that would be for a mouse, or a rat. Imagine what that would be like for us. Okay, so that's a whole category by itself, and it would take me a good 2 hours to explain it properly. For our purposes, we're interested in the first three. Most people, there's a small section of people who are number 4. Most of us are in 1, 2, or 3. Which one are you in?
I think I'm number 3.
You think
back
you're number
then.
3?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I
number 3.
was
Wait, let me recall. The number 3 was the one that
just disregarded the lever.
Yeah. And then you figure things out on your own.
Yeah.
I think I'm number 2 then. Yeah, I think
Okay.
I'm number 2. To be fair, in my life, yes.
Okay. So in your relationships, is he going to be faithful to me? Is he going to cheat on me? Is he going to leave me? Am I pretty enough is there's a constant stream of anxiety, and it's natural for all individuals to have anxieties of this kind. Even people with secure attachments do, but they become dysfunctional. Like he's going out with his friends for a drink, and he comes back and you smell his shirt and there's woman's perfume on it, and it's like, what's that? Suddenly there's this huge row, and then you find out the next day that somebody's wife was there and gave him a hug. That's anxious, right?
Yeah.
I was avoidant. I avoided people. There are reasons why I became avoidant. I don't want to go into that for personal reasons. And in being avoidant, my nurturing came in the form of fantasy, came in the form of books. When I was being at school, I found a place to hide in this beautiful library where I was surrounded by books, and I read practically all of the books in that library. And I would one day I would be in Gormenghast, Mervyn Peake's Crumbling Castle. Another day I'd be C.S. Lewis's The Lion and the Witch in the Wardrobe, and another day I would be reading the beautiful poems of Wilfred Owen of the First World War. I still think his poem Dulce et Decorum Est is the strongest anti-war statement ever made. Ever made. If you read that you cannot make it a stronger statement than that. It's so beautifully written, and especially sensitive register of the First World War. And that's where I grew my love of Shakespeare and of Milton and Shelley and all that kind of stuff. So I escaped into these fantasy worlds, right? And what that meant was, hey, I don't need attachments. I don't need them because I've got these things I can go into. So what's the problem? What's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is that that world isn't real. That's the problem, right? That world doesn't actually give you food. It doesn't actually nurture you. You can't come home and feel really distressed and ask that world to nurture you. It can't. It doesn't. It can help you to escape for a while.
Yes.
But ultimately, it doesn't nurture you in that way. And if you look at my addiction, it is exactly the same mechanism. It's a way of, I don't want to say avoidance, but if you're in a great deal of emotional pain and somebody gives you a mechanism to escape that pain, would you take it? You would. So you're in a great deal of emotional pain and somebody says, here's a mechanism. You can escape. You can grab it, you know. But then one day you come up against the pain that you cannot escape.
Yeah.
That's why it fails. And that was the boy on the walls. I could not escape that pain. There was nothing I could do that allowed me to. There was no fantasy, there was nothing, half a bottle of whiskey, whatever, nothing would. And that was my first real attachment. And because I couldn't handle that, things slowly started to disintegrate because the pain grew bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. I became obsessed with it, got bigger. So I needed to use more and more powerful ways to just be stable. First it was becoming an alcoholic and waking up in the morning and drinking before going to work, which as a doctor you really don't want to do because your breath smells, right? Eat mints and stuff like that. But as the story says, it was a long, slow descent down. But it was the last 18 months where I really went off a cliff. For most of my time as an addict, I had jobs, I was working, I somehow got by. The last 18 months, I just went off a cliff and my life just completely disintegrated. Huge amounts of violence. The old Soho, not like it is now. But I tell you what, the reverse, right? So works. The lack of nurturing, right, is the key to understanding disrupted attachment, the inability to form attachment. Nurturing is the key to forming secure attachments. And that's why I'll tell you a story that I only tell to my very, very close friends. When I was living in Soho, and this was, I was right at the bottom and very thin, very weak, and target for bullies, that kind of trap that people, if you're just mad at something, you just kick him, you just beat him up or whatever. And one night I'd taken a particularly bad beating off a gang of thugs. And I remember I was leaning against this door, and I heard the key open, and I thought it's going to be somebody booting me off the doorstep. So I tried to lift myself up but my ribs were cracked. So I was like, oh, but I was trying my best. But instead, what I felt was a hand on my shoulder and a mug of tea, the English drink tea, right, just come round, right, and put my hands. I was, what is this? I turned around and I realized it was a prostitute, but a slightly older one. She probably had like her regular customers, so she didn't walk the streets. I'd never seen her before. And for the next 3 hours, she bathed me, cleaned my wounds, took care of me, washed my clothes, just nurtured me. Never said a word to me, not one word, not even a hello. Just not a single word passed between her and I, right? And then 3 hours later, she opened the door and ushered me out. I've never seen her again. I don't know her name. I wish I did. I don't know where she is, because that was the first secure, that was the first true nurturing I think I felt, and how powerful it was when someone nurtures you in that way. And 3 weeks later, I stopped using drugs and alcohol. 3 weeks later, I stopped.
Wow.
And I didn't go completely into the brain mechanisms, but I did mention the brain opioid theory of social attachment. It's in the book, by the way, at fine Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere.
Yes.
The reason it works is because they use the same mechanism in the brain. It's hard for people to understand that unless they read it, and they read how it's explained and how it was found. And the person who found it was an Estonian neuroscientist called Jaak Panksepp, who sadly passed away a few years ago. I've read every single word. I don't know about you, but for me, if I find someone that I like their work, I obsessively read everything that they wrote.
Yeah, the same.
Like George Orwell. I've got everything. I've even read the reports that he sent to the BBC, for his, absolutely everything. So I read every single thing this man had to write, and in the very last paper that he co-wrote with his colleagues, one of the final statements he made, one of the very, very last statements he made in print is this: in newborn rhesus macaques, it's a type of monkey, yeah? So let's just say monkey. In newborn monkeys, morphine simulates mother. I'll repeat that. In newborn monkeys, morphine simulates the presence of a mother. If you have morphine, you don't cry for your mother, because the morphine is giving you, in an artificial way, the nurturing that you would get in the ordinary way, in the manner nature intended. You're getting it from that. And that is why if you ask any addict or any alcoholic, or next time you get a chance, try this. If you meet a heroin addict, just say, can you remember the first time you took it? Every single one of us will. And here's what he'll say. He'll say something like this when you ask him, what was it like? Was it like, did you go to the moon? And was it like stars? And, crazy? And that's not what he'll say. What he'll say is this. He will say, it was like someone putting a warm blanket around my shoulders, you know, and putting their arms around me and putting a hot mug of coffee in my hands and this feeling of safety. You know, I mean, what are they describing? They're describing nurturing. So that was it was understanding that was the missing link. I mean, this book, Affect Regulation, Yak Pangsep, I recently discovered, to my slight annoyance, that in a list of books, apparently, you know, Jordan Peterson, the famous psychologist,
Yes.
not particularly fond of him, but yeah, that's a personal sort of presentation style kind of thing, and he's correct a lot of stuff, but it turns out that out of his 15 favorite books, 11 are mine as well. So, you know, I don't know how that happened, but one of the books that he lists as a book that everyone should read is this book, Affect Regulation by Yak Pangsep. So,
all right, I'm going to add that on the blog to make sure that everyone else on top of your book, they will have additional valuable book to read after yours. Now, great understanding and bringing us back with that nourishing experience that you had with this lady that you never met, actually, blessed in disguise. Now, for all those people who have yet to get their own copy of this book, so most of the stories actually already in the book. Now, I want for everyone, including myself, to remember because here's my next question to you, Dr. Reshie. Other people will focusing on, you know, sharing their experience, knowledge, expertise on the people themselves, you know, and not publishing anything, a tool, program, whatever. But for you, you decided to publish this book. On top of that, you also, of course, seek consent from your patients, and also including your story in it. So my question is, why did you choose to publish this book? Of course, after your transition, what do you think that you felt that on top of many other books out there, there's something within me that I can share in this book that makes it amazing for most people to make it, have it valuable. So what's the story, and why do you think it's important that you publish this book?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question. You know, in this sphere of trauma and stress-related disorders, you know, traumatology, you know, I have all my great heroes like Pangsep and Bessel van der Kolk and Gabor Mate and, you know, various people.
Yeah.
But what I discovered from reading their work, and increasingly from listening to them, is they're speaking in ways that are either too ephemeral meaning too like spiritual, and then speaking, they're not explaining things in a way that, I'll give you an example, right? Mate says this, Van der Kolk says this as well. I've heard them both say it, okay? Where they go, trauma is a disconnection from the self. Yeah. Now, I understand what that means.
Yeah.
You understand what that means. But if you went out on the street and you looked around and you saw some guy munching on a Big Mac and you walk up to him and you say, I'm going to explain to you about trauma. Trauma is a disconnection from the self. What do you think he would say? Do you think he'd move closer to you or move further away from you. I mean, you know,
Yeah.
it complicates things where it doesn't need to complicate things, right? The word trauma comes from the ancient Greek word traumatikos, which simply means injury. It's just a wound. That's all it is. Yeah, it's a wound. And so I found that that was one. You know, I was getting so maybe mildly irritated with that. But the second one was the big one. And that was more and more of my patients were coming into my clinic with horrendous problems that had been created by experts on Instagram, social media.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah, so they'll go onto Instagram and look for someone who, puts themselves out, trauma coaching, trauma recovery, everything trauma, whatever, right? And then they'll either send them a message or communicate with them in some way, and then they'll get some advice, and then they'll go and do it. And it takes an already difficult problem, and now it makes it even worse. And so keep doing it. In other words, what I was beginning to find was that the lack of information, right, there was a hole where there wasn't any, someone had not sat down and said, look, here are the facts, okay? And because that hole was there, anybody could call themselves an expert on trauma coach, trauma this. I know people here who call themselves trauma coach. They know, absolutely nothing about trauma. I know people here call themselves a neuroscientist. The only neuroscience they know is the neuroscience they've heard me give at lectures. I mean, it's ridiculous, right? And that was something that bothered me, because that's if my life is devoted to the alleviation of suffering, this is causing suffering to people. And in some cases, it took a long time to undo the damage before I could start the healing process. And I was getting very, very worried about this, because I saw it not getting better, but getting worse. And I thought, well, if I'm going to act, I can sit with my colleagues and we can all sit there and, bitch and moan and go, you know what some guy on Instagram said about trauma? I can be one of those guys, or I can get off my fat ass and I can actually go and do something about it, right? And the perfect opportunity presented itself last year. I was very, very unwell for 4 months, where I was in hospital and then in and out of hospital. Believe me, when you're lying on a hospital gurney or a hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, enduring a mind-crushing, soul-eviscerating, I know, big words, I'm sorry, but the boredom is so bad, you feel like it's crushing your skull. It's like, I need to do something, And I remember, you'll probably never have heard of this guy, but he's a very famous Canadian singer-songwriter. His name is Leonard Cohen. And he used to write some very beautiful songs. Suzanne was one. Chelsea Hotel was another. Yes, great songs. He was also a poet, but he was not a very good poet. But he did write one anthology of good poems. And the title of the book is The Energy of Slaves. And there's one poem in that book, because I remember I was lying on the bed and I was so ill My weight, I think, was either 55.3 or 53.3 kilos.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, calculating, and this is the problem when you're a doctor, you know what calculations need to be made, right, to see whether you're going to get out of this or not. And I thought, it's now getting to the point where bone marrow is not going to be able to produce enough T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, macrophages, and all the stuff I need to fight off, my immune. In other words, I've crossed that point where my body cannot produce what it needs to fight, and that means whatever that thing is won. Yeah. So I was just lying there, and I thought, well, be sad to go, but at least I will go on the island that I love the most, the people that are dearest to me. And this poem from this book came to me, and it goes like this: and when I was sick, I did not turn to drugs or teaching. I tried to sleep, but when I could not sleep, I learned to write. I learned to write my bed on nights like these by one like me. For some reason, that just came into my head, and I just got up, got a piece of paper, and just started to write. And here we are.
Beautiful. I always believe, just to give you, I'm not sure whether I have shared this with you. I remember someone once told me when I created this Empower Your Life show, it started as a YouTube channel and turned to podcast platform. Someone once told me that, isn't it like a TEDx where you actually interview a person and then so on and so forth. So, for people who don't know your own mission and purpose, you will be very defensive, right? But how I responded to that is, that's right. But I always say this, but this is me. This is Cindy Marie. So this is going to be different because I have my own way of asking. I have my own way of operating or processing. So yes, it might look like a TEDx for you, but this is going to be different. And I think why I'm saying that, it's the same thing with your book that you have published. Many people would say, okay, what's the difference with other people that, like what you said, very well-known people? Why do you think? And I always believe that it doesn't matter whether you have that competition, which a lot of people belittle themselves just because of that. But we all unique. We have our own story that nobody can take that away from us, because it's only us who experience that. So this is why when I mentioned to you how much incredible and valuable your book, and now you're sharing with me that there's always a blessed in disguise if we see that whenever we are so down, yet there's always something that we can't explain. Especially, for example, you and I, we transition to somewhere now that we are serving it back.
Absolutely.
Because we feel that you mentioned this, that this is who I am, and this is exactly the same thing with me. Now, I had this conversation with you. Yes. That I told you this because of lack of information. I came from Philippines, and you know that, and it's all about grades, but really like understanding the information, not really embedded in my body and brain and all of that. So my understanding of trauma never exists, or never really come to think about that, not until I had a deeper conversation with you. And I want to share to people, again, who have yet to get their copy. It's very powerful and helpful, because at the back or at the end of the book, there, I don't know, I can't remember how many questionnaire. And that's really important for you to remember, because that's an indication, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Reshie, that that question is actually that will lead you whether how much trauma that you have experienced that you never knew, that from there you will be able to understand how deep the
Yeah,
trauma is. And
the questionnaire that you're talking about is called the ACE questionnaire, ACE,
yes.
which stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and it was done by two physicians, Vince Felitti and Bob. Felitti started, but it became so. I can tell you the whole story if you want, but I won't. But it mushroomed and became this huge study in 1998. And so he had to recruit Bob Anda from the CDC, and the two of them spearheaded the project. And when they published this research, it just blew the medical world apart. It just probably one of the most important medical papers published in the last 50 years, I would say. Right? I would say that Bowlby and Ainsworth's paper on attachment probably was the last one. And this one, Adverse Childhood Experience, do the questionnaire. Just do it. 10 questions. Just do it. You know? And I think in the book I explain what the questionnaire is all about and what it is for. But the thing about the questionnaire, and though it's measuring the trauma you've experienced, it's predicting not just that you have psychological problems, it's predicting, it predicts with alarming accuracy chances of you getting cancer, heart disease, metabolic syndrome, diabetes, asthma, very alarming stuff, right? And in 2012, because nobody was really taking this stuff seriously, one of the most important men then in the medical establishment, the core, the big names, Professor Jack Shonkoff, who sat in the Julius B. Richmond chair as professor of pediatrics at Harvard University, stepped in and wrote a very, very famous paper about this very subject. And I mean, you cannot get higher in the world of pediatrics than that's, as high as it goes. But even then, we still struggle to get the word out to people that you need to think about what happened to you in childhood. Because, in a story that I told about a young lady that was being sexually harassed by her boss, she went to see the doctor, and the doctor says, right, so Cindy Marie, what can I do for you? Oh, I can't sleep. Oh, you can't sleep. No problem. Here's a pill. 2 weeks later, you come back. Cindy Marie, you're back again. What's the problem? I'm having a lot of fights with my husband. I don't know why. I'm just fighting with him all the time. Okay, mood stabilizer. 5 weeks later, you come back again. Cindy Marie, what can I do for you? What is wrong? And you go, doctor, I'm so depressed. I'm so depressed. I know what it is. It's depression. It's depression. And it goes on and on and on like that. Now, imagine if the first question that the doctor asked was not, Cindy Marie, tell me what's wrong. Instead, if he said, Cindy Marie, what's been happening to you?
Yeah.
Your answer would have been a very different one. Your answer would have
Yes.
been, well, here's what's been happening to me. My boss has been sexually harassing me for 2 years, and can you help me get him to stop? To which any doctor worth his salt would have gone, give me his number. you know and she went to one doctor after another, very famous doctors, spent huge sums of money, and then met me. And I didn't ask her what was wrong. I just asked her, what happened? What happened?
Yeah.
And it just all came spilling out.
Yeah.
So it's not like you have to read Yak Pangsat, because this is not an easy book to read. Maybe you shouldn't put it on your list of recommended readings. It's a pure neuroscience book, and it's
I think for me, why I find it very helpful and valuable. Now, for a lot of people that have struggled far away because of not giving the attention of what really happened to you back then. Because I've known so many people, and I can remember one thing. I have spoken to a client of mine. It's very interesting. So our first conversation was all about the business that she's about to pursue, because she's still doing some part-time, and her business, not part-time, but the job is the full-time and the business is the part-time. And then so I said, okay, so let's talk about what you have done. And then so I asked, okay, it seems that to me you're doing pretty good progress with your business. So what is it that you feel like not happening? And then so I couldn't remember exactly, but that's what I remember, the first question that I have asked. And then it went down. And I always remember this because I'm also a true believer that what's happening with us right now has connected somehow, somewhere within your childhood, which I have shared that with you. I grown up being a pleaser, right? And so going back to the story of this lady, we ended up, she's having these tears, and she was shocked, and she was telling me, oh, I realized that I haven't really attended my childhood experience for forgiveness. And so I said, well, let's pause for this, set back and give that space of yours to really process that and see what you will need from there. Because obviously I'm not the person to assist her further, but at least I have helped her to understand what really happened. It's not all about the business.
At least
and
now
she went for
and now you know at least now you know exactly what to say to her. You can say to her, I have this book, it's very good, it's available at fine Amazon.com, bookstores everywhere. It's called a big sorry, I know it's a bit hucksterish of me to try and sell my book.
I'm just saying that this book for everyone that you can put yourself, maybe you will feel the resonance, maybe not, but understanding that most of us feel the need of figure things out just like that, where we actually never attended from the early age. So don't expect that. I've known many people like this, that I just want to get things out of this situation, but you can't expect the medicine to figure that out if you will not attend in that inner situation. And we talked about this, about the medicine, right? That we think, like what you just explained earlier as an example, we all looking for instant. Now, my curious question, as for you, specialist for this treating in trauma and other stressor-related disorders, what is your piece of suggestion for people out there that when you know that the medicine is no longer the answer for you, and you know deep inside of you that this has something to attend within your inner story, how would you think, or what will you suggest, or a question to that person to welcome themselves to look for people like you to really open up and really embrace themselves, that it requires time, it's not an overnight journey?
That's the $20 million question. That really is. You got a person sitting in front of you and they're taking 8-9 different medications and doesn't seem to be working, and you've done your assessment, your psychometrics and everything, and you are pretty sure that this is trauma and these drugs are gonna, if anything, they make it worse, not better. How do you break the news? What I've actually found is that by the time these people get to me, they already know. They already know something's wrong. They already know that the drugs are not working. The doctors they've been seeing don't understand. They already know. And yes, I will go through the psychometric evaluations that I do and all that, but very often I'm telling them something that they already know. They already know that something is not right here. And it's not like a small thing, you missed a small thing here, a small thing there. It's something really big. And the chapter that I wanted to write, in fact, the most important chapter in many ways that I didn't get to write, which I did a video about on LinkedIn, is the chapter on bipolar and trauma, because it's the most misdiagnosed condition, right? And the reason for that is bipolar is, in the classification system, bipolar is a disorder of mood. Trauma is a disorder of extreme, it's a disorder of stress, right? Now, in the case of bipolar, when they go manic, they go up. They become euphoric. They don't sleep for days. They can be aggressive. They can be, just mania, or hypomania, which is a sort of lesser version of that. But they're up, and then they crash. And when they crash really hard. Many commit suicide. That how they go. I mean,
I truly believe that when we tried so many things, in the end we knew something inside of us, the answer. So I guess to modify that question, how can we even avoid to get to the worst scenario or situation of any human beings? That how can I raise that question, like how to catch or recognize yourself that in this moment of time when you're having a situation, that there perhaps something within your childhood or your trauma or your wound in this case that you actually have to attend. Since you mentioned that when they already tried everything and yet still not working for something, I guess this is now all about my past journey. So how can we cut that then?
Well, to finish the thing bipolar, you have these up downs, and you have the same in trauma, and that's why they get, misdiagnosed. And when they do, oh God, trying to unwind that. It's taken many of my hours. But books like, not just the one that I've written, there's some very good books out there. The most famous one being The Body Keeps the Score by Sylvain Colt, When the Body Says No by Gawamate, The Body Remembers by Babette Rothschild, The Body Bears the Burden by just so many of them. And you go into a doctor and he says, right, I'm going to put you on this pill. That's where, if you read A Beginner's Guide to Trauma and he's going to put you on this pill, you can say to him, what's the pill for? And he says, it's going to help with your sleep, but it's also going to help with your anxiety and your calm you down a little bit. He said, yes, but you haven't addressed my avoidance behaviors. You haven't addressed my nightmares and my flashbacks. Talk to me about my deeply
condition, situation.
Low. Yeah, you haven't talked about this. And what about this? And you can look at the guy and you can say, you are giving me something, but we haven't even talked about everything yet. You only talked about one thing. I remember a very famous story told to me by someone I worked with, a young American somatic therapist, and she was, I think, an Olympic athlete, elite athlete, but then she got sick. Had all kinds of weird symptoms, and they one drug, another drug, all this kind of stuff. None of it worked, and the final solution was they were just gonna have surgery and they were gonna cut her gut out, just completely cut it out, the table, and they were about to wheel her in, and then she goes, stop, I don't want to do this. She got off the trolley, walked out of the hospital, and then began to find out about herself, find out what are the things that helped her. Started looking at diet, started looking at her lifestyle. She worked in the corporate world, gave up the corporate world, and discovered yoga, which for her was, I think, the linchpin. She's one of the two finest yoga teachers that I know of. The other is my stepdaughter Chelsea, who lives in Sydney. And she says that the moment that clicked for her was when she finally found a doctor who was not just throwing pills at her, but asking her, what's happening this week? What's happening with Katie this week? Is Katie having a good week, a bad week? And and what he said to her was, you need to be, an expert, right? You need to be an expert doctor in Katie. You, not me, not him, not all these people with, titles, professor or whatever. You need to be the doctor, the expert in your own right. And I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, I think so. I mean, yeah. Sorry, go on.
I think more and more people are beginning to realize that they cannot trust. Increasingly, they cannot trust the medical industry. For men like my father, who worked in it at a different time, to see the industry go the way. I mean, it must be heartbreaking. You know, when he looks at the state of it these days, I mean, I don't know how he feels. Very old man, but I think more and more people they feel there's something wrong. They can't quite articulate it. They can't quite, verbalize it and articulate it and say it, in a coherent way. I hope these are not too big. They can't say it. Yeah. But they know something's not right, It's like, you can't sleep. That you went to the doctor and you said you can't sleep. And you're taking how many pills? 8?
Wow.
People are beginning to catch on that things are just not really right, and then they come to people like myself, and I begin to unpack all the furniture, and then go. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to say, okay, I'm gonna put a star on the board, and the star's are gonna have 6 symptoms on it, and I want you to tell me whether you have each one. And it's in the book, and they look at it and their jaws just drop, because every single one of them, I mean, they say, Doc, you've just written my life story on the board. How did you know that? How did you know that? And what I've tried to do is I've tried to take that knowledge as best I can, because obviously every individual is different. There's no substitute for seeing someone on a one-on-one level, because that person is focusing on just you and the way you're presented, right? Every human being is unique, but presented in a broad enough way that if you have these domains of symptoms, if you find that you're avoidant, that you tend to be a loner, you tend to sort of be distant in your relationships, you don't like to get too close to people, you're avoidant. If you find that for seemingly no reason, a word can just send you into a rage or into a panic, or suddenly you get anxious and you don't know why, and then other times you just become really depressed. Nothing happened, but you're just depressed. And when something happens, it just goes round and round in your head. Why did I do that? I could have done this. Maybe if I did that, then this wouldn't have happened. And it just, that's what we call it intrusive, because it is intrusive, which is, if I done this first and then that would have happened, but then you see, if I done that and then this was happening, it just goes round and round and round and round, right? If you got that, if you've got core beliefs that are really look into yourself, and you think, who's ever gonna love me? I'm unlovable. And then it moves to the second position in Beck's cognitive triad, which is, and other people are going to look at me and go, we're not going to like him, we're not going to love him, right? Then leads to a belief of the future, which is, I'm not going to have any friends, I'll be alone. And of course, that's eventually what happens, which reinforces the first point. Nobody loves me. No one. Who is going to love me? No one. And of course, eventually, if the person has been in that situation for long enough, they'll start to develop physical manifestations of prolonged psychological distress. And this is where your A study comes in, right? This is where the questionnaire comes in. If you put somebody under psychological distress for too long, the hormonal apparatus that operates the stress system now starts to poison the body. And soma is the Latin word for body. So somatoform means, you know, forms that are presenting from the body, right? And so you start seeing these weird symptoms beginning to appear for no reason, you know, sort of leaky bowel, irritable bowel, chronic pain syndrome, fibromyalgia, you know, sort of chronic headaches, you know, all these strange things coming up for no apparent reason. Once you've got to that, that's number 6. And of course, the first is the event itself, or set of events. And people look at that and they just go, oh my God, that has been my life for the last 25 years. And I've been to every doctor, and one tried to treat that one tried to treat that one tried to treat that one said it was that one. And then I look at them and I say, well, how about we treat all of them? Think that. And they look at me and they think, well, the answers are very varied, but they look at me and they just go, for the first time, I understand what's wrong with me. The first time I actually understand what is actually wrong. Somebody has explained it in a way that I understand. And I understand that you cannot just deal with this and leave the rest, or deal with that and leave the others. You have to deal with all of them if you want to heal completely. You have to.
Yeah.
This is not a la carte menu, yeah?
Yeah. I just want to add on that. There's a power of really working on yourself. And as we grow older, we tend to, because we build our reputation, our personality, our identity. And even though we have all those signs, usually our symptoms, those are the messengers. We neglect to attend to that because of the busyness of outside that we thought that could help us to get distracted. However, as you know, as I continue my journey, not only coaching, but all of the spiritual and understanding how human behaviors really work or function, there's a power really when you attend to yourself, when you work on your inner being, who you are. Like it will be scary because you would realize how much you have gone through. But at the same time, when you look back right now, I'm speaking to myself, how much I have gone through, and how much I have forgiven people, and how much I am still facing some challenges in my life that beyond my control. But I know myself well. And whenever I know that I catch myself in a pain or something, it always having that space of not judging ourselves, because we are putting a lot of pressure in ourselves that just because we're feeling pain, it means that we are weak. And that's not true. It just means that our body, our thinking, our self saying something that we have to attend. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's actually a beauty that you can recognize that. Because the more that you recognize that, the more that you have to attend. Because the more that you neglect or avoid that, the more that you ended up, as what Dr. Reshie said, you have this constant psychological thoughts that will end up what we call suicidal. And we don't want that. You know, I
No, we
always
don't.
believe that we have a beautiful life that we deserve. Yet we have to work on that as well, because we are born here to create the life that we deserve. Now, don't get so attached from outside. Love yourself. Love yourself that you
Yeah,
deserve yourself to have whatever you want in life. And by doing that is understanding what is trauma, what is causing deep inside of you that constant pain. That pain has a message. It's not something because of your stress at work. That's just part of that. But there's something really in here that we have yet to attend. And this is part of why it's so important for me, honestly, Dr. Reshie, to talk about this trauma, because in my circle of people, maybe they're not even aware of this trauma, as I have mentioned that to you, that for me,
yeah,
I never knew that.
yeah,
Then the moment I recognized that, I just realized, oh my God, I have that trauma. But then I am very blessed because I didn't have to go through the other pain that most of the story that you have, that's really suffering, you know, very sad to hear and to read. But there's still a hope, right? As long as we
yeah,
live, I always believe
yeah.
there's a hope. As long as we love ourselves, as long as we believe that we deserve a love, don't be afraid to seek for help.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things I'd like to say to that, if I may. The first is, very often I get told, ah, so you're blaming the parents. That's always what people do. Blame the parents. Blame mummy, blame daddy. You know, that famous Philip Larkin poem, you know, they fuck you up, your mum and dad. They do not mean to what they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add a few more just for you, you know.
So don't get children. Remember that.
Yeah, the last verse goes, man hands on misery to man, deepens like a coastal shelf. Get out as quickly as you can and don't have any kids yourself. Is that the one you were thinking of?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think maybe that's not such a good way to go. But I always say to them, why do you think I'm blaming them? Um, why, you know, is it not that I'm simply trying to understand them? Because apart from I think it's something like 4.5% of the global population, round about 4.3% are identifiably sociopathic or psychopathic, right? And apart from those people, the rest of humanity, every parent on this planet does the absolute best that they can in the circumstances that they have,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
If it's sociopathic, psychopathic parents, whoa, bad luck, kid. But that's a very, very, very small number. And usually somebody intervenes because it's so obvious. But do you think your parents didn't do the best they could? Do I think, I mean, I didn't go into it into detail, but yeah, childhood for me, for a child to need to completely disappear on an almost permanent basis. I mean, you have to be in quite a lot of pain to do that, right? Do I blame my parents? No, don't blame them. You know, it's not their fault. My parents did the best that they could for me under the circumstances that they were living in at the time. They still continue to do the best for me, whether I agree with it or not. And I believe that it's the same all. But there's a difference between saying that my parents loved me and did the best they could for me, and saying my parents might have made some mistakes that I'm paying a really heavy price for. You know, they didn't mean it, but it happened. You know,
Yeah.
I'm now paying a very, very heavy price for that. But you know, I need to go and figure it out. But does it mean that you blame your parents? Does it mean it's their fault? No, it's not. They did the best they could. It's just, and that's why the great psychodynamic psychologist Donald Winnicott, he belongs to that era of psychology just after Freud, you know, Melanie Klein, that lot. He coined the phrase good enough mothering, because he recognized that the good mother is an anachronism. It doesn't exist. All mothers make mistakes. All of them do, right? And that's why he said the good enough mother. If you have good enough positive experiences with your mother versus negative ones, because there is no such thing as the perfect mother, the mother who never makes a mistake, who never does anything wrong, never loses a day. You know, find me one. Just find me one. You won't. And he coined the term good enough mothering. You know, so that tells us a great deal. That tells us an awful lot. So that's the first thing I wanted to say. And the second thing I wanted to say was about something you were talking about. I seem to have lost my word. What were you saying just before I jumped in? You were talking about you were talking about your own journey, and you know, the importance of personal self-care and how important it is for that. I mean, I know the little that I know about your story, and I think it's an extraordinary one. Personally, for you to have been where you are and to be where you are now is, I think, remarkable. Given, I mean, you're a very young woman and extremely positive and changing the world through your podcasts and all this sort of stuff that I don't understand. I'm not going to change the world that way. I'm going to be writing. But it's a funny thing that those of us who are healers, or those of us who help others, you know, the healers, okay, you want to call them, let's just call them the healers. We tend to everybody else first and ourselves last. I'm guilty of that, and I paid a very, very, very heavy price for it. But it isn't just me. You know, many of us do that. So what you said is so important. It's probably one of the most important things. If you want to be good at this job, what you just said, you've got to do that. You've got to do that, because if you put yourself last, you burn out. You know, they used to say the average lifespan for a counselor was 5 years, and then they're completely burnt out. You know, nobody wants to do trauma. Nobody wants to do personality disorder, because it's, you know, I mean, listening to the stories of these Afghani women, you know, they just, no, I don't want to do that, you know, kind of thing. So there has to be a way in which you are able to care for oneself, and one is able to recognize that I'm part of this milieu as well. You know, there's your healing, and there's his healing, and his healing, and his healing, but there's my healing as well, which is part of this. And a very famous, very interesting man, very famous Canadian author called Henri Nouwen. Henri Nouwen, when he was a young man, was a priest of the church, right? He was a young priest. But when people used to come to him with problems, he noticed that he didn't really know how to advise them. He would just, say Hail Marys and, that kind of thing, right? Yeah. Yes, my son. Say 3 Hail Marys and 2 Hail Josephs, or whatever it is that Catholics do. But he noticed he could never really give them real solutions. Like, the reason why your marriage is in this position is because you're doing this, you idiot. You couldn't do that. So he went off. He quit the church. He went off, studied, and became a very, very high level, doctoral level psychologist. Practiced for 40 years. 40 years. And at the end of his life, he retired and he went back to the church, became a priest again. And when he did that, he wrote the most wonderful books you'll ever read. It's one of those Viktor Frankl type books, and it's called The Wounded Healer. There is what I particularly love in this book, the many things that he says, but what I particularly love is that those of us who are most grievously wounded, the most wounded amongst us, make the best healers.
I believe that so, because we don't want other people to experience what we have experienced, and therefore we do it in another way. Instead of a victim, we becoming the warrior to protect other people. And that's for analytical or logical, we call it leaders, right? Or thought leaders. And we talked about this. You want to add something, or
just a very quick statement? My theory, that he doesn't say this, but this is my theory, so I want to be very careful. Henri Nouwen doesn't say this. This is Reshie Joseph saying it based on what he's read in the book. People can go, he didn't say that. I think it's about pain. That's why those of us who have suffered most, eventually, if we're given the chance, become the healers. It's because of our capacity to recognize and connect with pain. Like me, if I walk into a room and somebody is in pain, I know instantly, I can feel it. Feel it. And I'm never wrong. If I go up to that person, if the opportunity presents itself, and I say to them, you are in a lot of pain, aren't you? And they look at me like, no, fine. And I go, okay, sorry, I didn't want to spoil your party or anything, but I just thought I'd say, I think that you're in attendance, and I don't mean physical pain, I mean emotional pain. There's something happening in your life that's really hurting you on the inside. But I'm sorry if I'm wrong. Please forgive me. I'll walk away. And 2 hours later, that person will come and find me and they'll say, do you have a business card? And that's when I go, ugh, forgot them. Find pens and bits of paper. No, yeah, they'll 2 hours later they'll come and find me and they'll say, I'm sorry if I was rude when you first said that, because you're a stranger, I don't know who you are. And you just said this, and so I was a bit, pushed you a little bit. But I don't know how you knew this. I don't know how you know it, but you're absolutely right. What do I do? Here's the number. Just give me a call. Pick up the phone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pain. It's the ability to connect with and to really be an exceptional therapist, I think you have to be able to take on some of the pain that your client feels. It's very hazardous, right? And early in your career you will make mistakes and take on too much, and then oh my god, it goes horribly wrong. That's why we have clinical supervisors and stuff. But as you get better and more skillful at it, you do things like therapeutic dissociation and stuff. But how can I truly empathize with the girl who was starved for 1.5 years, made to sit and watch her siblings eat while she was starved? How am I supposed to really help her if I am not able to feel what that 9-year-old girl was feeling? And because she was telling me like it was, like an ordinary story, and she noticed that my eyes were tearing up, and I was, she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "I can't believe what I'm hearing." She said, "Why? What's wrong?" She didn't realize there was anything wrong in starving children and beating them, and anything like that. And by taking on that pain and being able to reflect it, that was when she was able to see it in herself for the first time, because her brain had become so good. Every memory you have has a thinking part and has an emotional part, right? So if I say, "What did you have for breakfast this morning?" Maybe you say, "I had bacon and eggs." And you have the thinking part, which is bacon, eggs. Yeah, they were cooked well. The sauce was nice. That was okay. Nice restaurant, right? That's your thinking part. But you also have an emotional part that goes, I was really happy. I was with my boyfriend or husband, good company, nice environment, very calm. That's the emotional part, yeah? And you need both these parts, okay, for the memory to be complete. What trauma does is that the emotional part can become so overwhelming.
Yes.
Like, for a woman who's raped, for example, the emotional intensity of the rape is so overwhelming that the brain splits the two. It splits off the thinking part, and it splits off the emotional part. It's a defense mechanism that we have, and in that moment, it does. It allows you to function. It allowed this young lady to function for 30 years, and she's now C-level executive at barely 30 years old. I mean, she's incredibly successful, able to do all of these things. But when I think about the sessions that I had with her, to me, they read like a Charles Dickens novel. Like Oliver Twist, going up to the front, going, "Please, sir, may I have some more?" That kind of thing. It's just nauseating. So when that splitting occurs, we call that dissociation. That memory is dissociated, and the brain does that to protect itself, because that emotional component is too overwhelming. Because it's the emotional component that allows you to remember. It's the key to your memory, right? If you're walking around in the jungle, in the savannah, and you see a 20-foot tiger, and you feel, frightened out of your wits, and you run like hell back to the camp and scream and tell everybody there's a 20-foot tiger, okay? I promise you, 50 years later, when you're sitting around the campfire and your great-grandchildren are there, you'll still be telling the story. And the reason why you're still telling the story is because of how intense that feeling was. It's a feeling that causes you to remember the story, not the thinking part, right? So that really intense feeling, the fear you would have felt, that's the bit that would make you tell your great-grandchildren, "Oh my God, you should have seen this tiger," and you would tell it in detail. This is what the emotional component of our memory is for. But what happens if that emotional component is so overwhelming that it gets taken and buried? It's just there. It hasn't disappeared, it's buried, right? So it still has the capacity to affect you, but you just don't know it, because from day to day, the thinking part is still there. You can still remember 2 + 2 = 4. You can just testing. The thinking part of your memory is still working. You can go to work, and you can go to work and be incredibly successful. Not 2 + 2 = 4 successful. I mean, make turn a $560 million fund into a $3.3 billion fund in under 5 years. That kind of thing. Using your thinking memory, your thinking brain. But at some point, that bit that you're split off and pushed down, it hasn't disappeared. It will come back. And just like in Albert Camus' novel La Peste, in the last scene, the mayor says, "Don't think we've won, because the rats are still in the sewer, and one day they will come up again into a free city." And it's when I think of repressed and suppressed traumatic memories, I always think of Camus, although a bit differently now, because I noticed he didn't. Never mind. So what the trauma therapist does is he slowly brings that emotional component out. So it's like you take a Coke bottle and you shake it, right? Shake it like that, it's full of fizz. If you just open the bottle, it's just gonna go everywhere. Yeah. And Usually that's what happens to people when the emotional component gets triggered. They go everywhere, right? They explode, or they become suicidal, or they can't sleep, or their brains just, like are on fire. Have that explosive reaction from something that has been, like a spring that has been compressed, the utmost power of its compressibility suddenly being released. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But then you go and meet somebody like me, and we go, no, that's not a good way of doing it. Better way of doing it is we just open the cap a little bit, let a little bit out, close it back up. Next week, open a bit more, yeah, and then slowly the memories come out. That's not to say that it's painless. It's still painful. It's still painful, but it's painful in a way that the individual can assimilate and integrate. And that wonderful thing that you said about looking after yourself and knowing yourself. The great Carl Gustav Jung, said, if you do not make what is inside your unconscious mind conscious to yourself, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So yeah,
that's a very
Carl Gustav Jung, Cindy Marie. Hey.
good one. And it's I've been listening and listening and listening, and it's so powerful how you ended up to that message. How powerful the self-care. And so we can talk on this on and on and on. It's a big subject, and what I could suggest to people who's watching or listening, if you find this valuable, I would maybe ask you a little bit favor. If you feel like you want to have another session with Dr. Reshie, and you find it more and more valuable to discuss in depth, give us a comment or leave us a comment in either YouTube or in the podcast, and we will connect again and give you a really on-depth discussion about trauma and how we can help you further, because obviously this is an introduction who's Dr. Reshie and about his book. And again, from the title itself, A Beginner's Guide to Trauma. So if you don't know that you have trauma, or you feel like that maybe, then I would suggest that you grab a copy and see and take it from there. All right. And now we talked about the self-care, Dr. Reshie, and we are almost finishing this conversation or this episode. You caught yourself as well earlier that you're guilty of yourself as well, that you're not looking after previously of yourself, therefore you also pay so high for this. Now for you, personal, like professional set aside, I would like to ask you, how do you keep yourself optimistic in a sense? Is there something, meditation, yoga, something that could be a valuable suggestion for other people to take part, experiment and explore, that could help him as well?
Well, I'm just waiting for the bit where you say available at fine Amazon.com bookstores worldwide. I'm just waiting for you to say that bit.
Yes, well, in Amazon, because I'm not sure. I mean, I guess I am too assumptive about people would know where to grab it, or maybe if it's in local bookshops.
This goes back to a much earlier time when there was no Amazon, and when people did a book tour, they would say, has the book been published? And they'll always say, yes, it's available. It's available in fine bookstores, everywhere, So.
And no worries, Dr. Reshie, in my blog, in my podcast, in my YouTube, the information will be available where they can grab it. And I guess what's important now is more on sharing the value of the content of your book, and
Yeah.
helping them to really have that experience and feeling. It's all about the
Yeah.
feeling of what's inside, so they will get more
Mm.
curious to get understanding about the trauma. So yeah, going back to the question, what is it something that Dr. Reshie
I'm
actually
sorry.
keeps himself, because you are getting a lot of information,
Yeah.
stories that we all know could be really overwhelming. So I'm really
Mm.
curious, and I'm sure most of people watching or listening also curious. How do you keep yourself optimistic? Would there be a morning routine? Would there be a night routine? Whatever that is, you can share a one or two.
Well, there's a professional and there's a personal.
Okay.
The professional is that it is what I believe to be a ringside seat to the greatest miracle that there is.
Hmm.
You're sitting right by the boxing ring or whatever ring, MMA or whatever, okay? You have a ringside seat to the most unbelievable miracles where people come in and they are so broken, and you look at them and you think, whoa, dude, I don't know. And you see them start to put the pieces of their life together, you know. And then that's why I love um, uh, every year at a sort of new year and that, because I will get emails from my ex-clients and they'll say, do you remember me, Dr. Reshie? Do you remember when I came in to see you? I was thinking of alcohol. My wife had left me, took the 3 kids. I'd just been fired from my job, and I was deciding whether I was going to kill myself that day. And I thought, I'm going to go and see the psychologist, and if he doesn't say anything while, then I'm just going to walk into the sea and keep walking, right? That's my plan. 10 years later, this guy is doing ultra marathons. He's a triathlete champion. He's got 2 companies. He's, just the transformation is, you just look at it and you go, whoa, and you get to play a part in that as well.
Yeah.
You're, a little bit of that is you playing your part. So that's the professional. That's the bit that kind of makes me really optimistic because of the capacity of humans to surprise. It's just, you just never know. You look at someone and you think, no way, they're not gonna make it, and somehow it happens. On the personal, well, I mean, there's the butterfly effect. I often thought to myself, if one person bought this book, right, and that one person happened to read it and said, oh my God, that is my cousin John. So he wants to give it to John, but John doesn't want to read it. John's like, I don't have a problem. So John's mom picks up the book, reads it, and she goes, holy crap, this is like him and like her and like her and like her. And so she, so suddenly you've got this butterfly effect happening, right? So on a personal level, I don't know if we can call that personal, but yeah, I mean, I'm an early riser. I love the sea. I surf. I don't know if you can see my pool.
Yes, I can see.
The first thing I used to do before I did anything else was just jump straight into the pool. The first thing I used to do before I did anything else. But now, first thing I do, you saw that cat that walked across the screen. Yeah. The first thing I do, I have to feed that kitten, because, oh my God, you should hear him scream when he's hungry. And he will scream and scream and scream and scream and scream non-stop until the food is in front of him. So it's like, okay, feed the kitten, get the kitten to stop screaming, then get in the pool.
Oh my God, the responsibility of having I would say the babies, because that's considered
Yeah,
like a baby as well. They're seeking
yeah,
so much attention, actually. Well, there
yeah.
you go.
So
It's fun.
get in the
Yeah.
pool, yeah, and that kind of prepares you for the sea, which is a little bit colder. So get
Mhm.
up and, don't go surfing, wax the surfboard, and if not, sometimes just surf your lengths, do a little bit of. I'm very lucky to live on an island where there are some. I mean, exceptional is not the word for it. I mean, unbelievably gifted yoga meditation teachers, and I've
Mm,
learned from some of the
that's
finest
great.
outside of India and Thailand. This is the place. If you're interested in that, come here. This is the place for that. So whilst I'm not a real expert at that, I'll do that just to kind of really open everything, open myself up to whatever's coming.
Yeah.
And of course, most important of all is to quiet the mind. The
Mm-hmm.
mind has to be quiet.
Yes.
Without the quiet mind, can't do the job. So
Mm-hmm.
does that answer your question? Seemed like a bit of
Absolutely.
seemed like a bit
No,
like bit
no,
of a weak answer.
no, no, please. There's no such thing as weak, because we have talked about it. Every individual practices, routines that works for them. So it's always an amazing to hear what expert or thought leaders like you have to say about keeping yourself optimistic, because for me it's very important. We tend to, which we have already talked about it earlier, to serve more and more, and then we forget about ourselves. But now, since we acknowledge and recognize that there's a
Yeah.
power of looking after yourself, quieting the mind, be intentional with your body. What is your intention for the day? And feeding the cat in your case, and then jumping on the pool. There could be something that, oh yeah, I know what Dr. Reshie is talking about, feeding the cat or the kitten, because I have mine as well. So it's not weak answer. Anyway,
Yeah.
I would like to acknowledge you for this amazing conversation, Dr. Reshie. Really, really, really valuable. And I'm sure that this conversation is not good enough to talk in depth about your book. And for other people who find it very fascinating, curious more, especially if they're based in the same location as you do. So tell us, where can we reach Dr. Reshie? And this is the place where they can grab your book. And yeah, so
Well, now, where can you find available at fine Amazon.com bookstores everywhere.
and sorry,
If you
you have
want to,
also
if
in
you want to read,
Kindle
you
format,
can
or it's
you
just the
can
hard?
get it. You can get it in Kindle, or you can
Okay.
get it in paperback. We have an audio version, but the audio version for
Uh-huh. The book.
the fine Amazon.com stores is a highly complicated process. So what we've done is, you know, I've
Uh-huh.
I've recorded the audiobook myself,
Nice. Okay.
all 13 hours of it. I read.
Oh wow.
I'd like the listeners to know that I
Good.
read 13 hours. I read. Um, yes, it's going to be available on our website, which is livingfree.today. If you key in livingfree.today, you'll find you find us, and you can, all our contact details are in there. You can WhatsApp us, you can email us, you can, yeah, whatever. And
Where
we're
else
gonna,
in socials where they can see some of your content or posts?
well, there's a whole bunch of videos on my website.
Okay.
But the thing is, there's so much content. There's one particular podcast on my website, and it's with a young lady called Kartika. It's a split screen, so I'm sitting on this side, she's sitting on this side, and that podcast is really worth watching. Yeah, that podcast is really worth watching because she just knew the questions to ask, because she's a practitioner as well. She's a professional as well. So, I mean, I think there's at least 10, 15 videos on there, but that's the one that I think is the best, really.
Amazing. So, because every conversation has different depth of conversation about trauma. So there you go, everyone. And don't worry if I'm going to put the information of where to connect, where to find the website in my blog and also in my podcast. So rest assured that will be provided. And so that's it, Dr. Reshie. Amazing conversation. Thank you so much for sharing all the information, not only from the book, but also for your experience. And it's been very helpful and valuable.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you, Cindy. Thank you for inviting me on your podcast, and perhaps we'll do this again soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. So thank you so much, Dr. Reshie, and everyone out there listening or watching. Again, if you find this episode super valuable and you want to be digging more and more, so check out his website, the videos, and also don't forget to share this episode to everyone you think that will be benefiting this valuable information. The more the merrier, and the more that we could help people to heal as well. So until then, I'll see you next time. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Reshie.
Namaste.
Thank you, and see you next time. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that interview, and I hope you find it inspiring and motivating. Remember, stay optimistic and keep taking action slowly but surely for your big dreams. Thank you once again, and I'll see you on the next episode here at Empower Your Life.